Healing from depression and avoiding suicide. It's that time of year when everything seems to come together to drive a whole lot of people into depression or exacerbate existing down feelings, at least in the northern hemisphere. More specifically, it's winter and darker. There are shorter days, there's less sunlight. The holiday season, which means pressures on the finances, time with family, can bring stress and sadness in so many ways. Time away from family and remembrance of losses in the past. Many people exercise less this time of year, creating lethargy and down feelings. Eating patterns often grow undisciplined and out of control, thus decreasing feelings of self-worth, and so much more. For so many people, it's when the hardness of life seems to increase. For some, this increased negative self-talk, self-loathing, withdrawal from others, and increased loneliness and hopelessness all come to a head. Is this you? Are your negative feelings pulling you down? Does it get worse this time of year? Or is it pretty much bad all year? Whatever the case for you, there can be little dispute that depression and its kissing cousin, anxiety, are a beast. They can suck the very life out of you. And so, what we're stuck with in life is the grand question of what the heck to do with it. Is there anything that can be done or done with it or done to it? Or is it simply a burden that must be shouldered and never escaped? So before I get into the questions of depression and suicide, I need to say this. I need to remind you that I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a licensed mental health counselor, social worker, or anything related to the medical field. It is critical that you understand this. I am a soul counselor. I do not approach depression, anxiety, or any other life problem from the perspective of medicine, which I have found profound respect for. Don't get me wrong. I've been a soul counselor for 30 years. That means I simply approach everything, even depression and anxiety, from a soul perspective, a deeper perspective, with often upside down, counterintuitive answers in simple layperson language. But if you believe you need medical help, if you are suicidal, please reach out to your medical professional or those resources for addressing your mental health problems. And as one resource, you can dial 988 in the United States for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So what is depression? I was in a suicidal depression for 12 years, no lie. It went from roughly my early to mid-20s to my mid-30s. It swallowed me whole. It was as if life itself was sitting its fat ass right on my head. And I couldn't breathe. I had happy moments, I won't lie, but it's as if everything I tried led to dead ends, roadblocks, angry or resistant people, or just egregious amounts of labor for even the smallest gains. And I just assumed, I guess this is what life is. No matter what professionals I saw, no one really had any answers for me. Plenty of guesses, but nothing that rang true or helped. I had a lover or two fully convinced they knew exactly what was wrong with me, and they were more than happy to tell me so. Better to keep the focus off of their failures, their shortcomings, their indiscretions, their own insecurities. Just focus on everything that's screwed up about Sven. For me, the depression was a lot of time in bed, a lot of time alone, reading and walking, and a lot of deep thought. But the biggest aspect for me was the lack of clarity. So many things seem simultaneously true. So many voices of so many people got inside of me and caused so much self-questioning and doubt. As the years of depression rolled on, the sense of no way out only increased, and the feeling of just wanting it all to be over with only intensified. For at least a decade, I had a semi-regular thought that would come and it would go. Increasing in intensity and frequency, though, over time, the thought of killing myself, how I'd do it, etc. For me, it was razor blades. Razor blades right to the wrist, right up the arms. It just made the most sense. I could do it anywhere. Having grown up in sports and around brothers, the ideas of bruises and cuts was not anything intimidating, and it was an exit medium that was completely under the radar, as long as I had a few bucks and access to a Walgreens or CVS or some other drugstore. Thoughts of suicide were one of the few things, at times the only thing, that could offer me the relief of clarity of thinking and the relief of all of the heaviness of life being done. Nowadays, many, many years later, it's easy to forget how intense those years were, but I know the thoughts of suicide became daily, even multiple times per day. So what was depressing for me? It was really no different for me than it for every depressed client I've ever worked with. It's always some derivative of lack of energy, sadness, often heightened anxiety, the utter fog or lack of clarity, no desire to move, and or constant movement to avoid the feelings of lethargy and down, the feeling of so much pain, of so many flavors, and self-loathing in one way or another. There are other indicators, and every person experiences these things in different ways and degrees, and each deals, or doesn't deal, with it differently. But the overwhelming nature of depression is common, as is the fact that it largely increases over time. It doesn't magically heal itself. I've got some videos on my website, if you look under this article, that I've done on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and so forth on depression, on suicide, and more. Go to the website, Badass Counseling, and check them out. So where does depression come from? This is the point in the conversation where I, as a soul counselor, deviate from the established or common conversation on depression. See, all life, including pain, is a gift. See, I believe all life is gift. All. That doesn't mean it's without pain, just that everything, including pain, is gift. Even that which thrashes us and destroys us inside is, in the end, a gift. If we allow it to be. It holds in its terrible claws wisdom, depth of insight, healing, life-changing metaphor, and evolution into higher consciousness, compassion, and yes, vigor. I've counseled people who have lost a child or two, killed others, whether in war or civilian life, and are perhaps now in prison, attempted suicide, lost fortunes and families, lived through the Holocaust or other horrors, been abused in every manner possible, and experienced every aspect of pain life could possibly throw at them. And whether you believe it or not, I've seen them courageously go into all their inner pain and through the brutal work come out the other side not just changed, but deepened, strengthened, healed, and calm in a way they never were before and never could have imagined. And yes, a great many of them reached the startling, painful, yet very real conclusion that in its own ugly ways, it was an upside down blessing for them in their own personal relationship with their own soul, quite apart from how the events might be perceived by others or humanity as a whole. They'd never want to do it again, but in the end, it was a profound gift to their life. Yes, you read that, you heard that correctly. Every pain is the soul calling us down, in the words of James Hillman. Depression is the soul calling us into ourselves, proclaiming that this life we're living presently is not who we are, is not who I am. Depression is the call of the soul down into the destruction of old self because old self wasn't working and held no hope of ever working. Old self was driven by external voices and expectations, not to mention ego and all its wants and fears. But old self was consistent with, even anathema to, the authentic self, written on the depths of who you really are. Depression is simultaneously the call to the destruction/solution deep inside of you, and the red alert that what we're longing for and living isn't our truest self. Hear that again. Depression is simultaneously the call to the destruction/solution, and it's the red alert that what we're longing for and living isn't our truest self. It's that place deep inside where the true voice of the soul rising up inside meets the voices and pressures that have been stuffed down your throat from the beginning. That conflict between those two voices, external and internal, is at the heart of depression. That's what it really is. Not to mention the heart of anxiety, the grating of those two voices where they meet, the external and the internal, whether they meet in your chest, in your throat, or deep, deep down. That incessant grinding of one voice on the other is the origin of all internal unrest. It is the great tectonic plates shifting and grinding against each other inside, and then all the surface level earthquakes that deep grinding causes. Depression is the solution, not the disease. Seen as such, the whole tectonic plates and the grinding of the external against the internal, rising up from the soul, seen as such, depression is then the solution, not the disease. Running from it and the pain implicit in it is thus running from the very resolution and relief you seek. See, what you're really struggling with at the root is the tug of war between who you really are and who they want you to be. And the price of authentic self is the losing of them, the disappointing of them, the wrath of them. And for many people, that is too high a price to pay. So they attempt to persist in making those external voices and pressures in people happy. However, the price of that is the rejection of self, the self-neglect, the abject misery, the incessant busyness, or the drugs of one sort or another to numb yourself to how freaking miserable you are inside. A choice between outer pain and inner pain. See, what you're really choosing between is outer pain and inner pain. Them hating on you or you hating on your authentic self. And for far too long, you've chosen to assuage, at least temporarily, your own pain by just incessantly pleasing them. Maybe it's your parents, your siblings, aunties, uncles, spouse, society's definitions of manhood or womanhood, your mentor, or even your own children. But it doesn't work, does it? Nah. I mean, let's be honest. You wouldn't be reading an article on depression and suicide and all this depressing crap like suicide unless it resonated with your own experience. So by that theory, if you dig deep enough, you'll see and feel the very thing you've been self-medicating or medicating yourself from. You're freaking miserable because you're not self-authoring. Someone else or someone else's have been authoring your life, using all the leverage they have for doing so. Likely leverage and power they took from you at a young or vulnerable time and never gave it back. In the words of Gloria Steinem and Godfather Part 3, real power cannot be given, it must be taken. The part that makes depression so damn intimidating is that the solution demands seizing, however you need to do it, that which is rightfully yours. Your own power to self-govern, which was your God-given right from the beginning. And the seizing is preceded by something even more important. Hear me on this. Permission. You keep waiting for someone in life to give you permission to be your authentic self when the ugly ass part of life is that there ain't no knight on no horse coming along to give you what your soul needs at its deepest level. You have to give yourself the permission to seize your life. Tragically, yet grotesquely beautifully, permission pretty much invariably only comes from pain, extreme pain. It pushes you to that point. The pain of inauthentic living, the pain of being told what to do, the pain of being minimized and eating the shit of others, eventually, and long down the road, eventually, leads to what I call the fuck it point, where you no longer care what they think. You no longer are unclear in what you want. You no longer wait for or even think you need their permission. You self-permit. You choose to seize your life back. You're no longer even afraid of the backlash, the anger, the disappointment, the levers of their former power over you. You simply know that your own permission is enough, and it's all you've ever needed. And maybe later you kick yourself for not doing it sooner, but in the now, you know that it is time and you are ready. Permission. Is depression a mental illness? Sure, why not? Pretty much anything can be perceived as a mental illness. And Lord knows it sure feels like an illness of the mind. I've been there. That's indisputable, but is it mental illness? A whole lot of people, a lot of really, really, really smart people say so. So there you have it. And again, I ain't a mental health professional, so it's probably best not to listen to me. At least not on that one. I'm not saying it is or is not a mental illness. I have no idea, and I don't really care. For to me, it's a symptom of a greater disease of the soul. Thus, the healing is at the soul level. And if you don't believe that, that's okay. Go the mental illness route and work with the very smart medical folk. They have powerful medicines. My medicine is for the soul. So how do I know if I'm depressed? In layman's terms, you're likely depressed if, 1, life sucks and it sucked for a long time, even when things on the outside seem to be going well. 2, do you sleep or just lie in bed far more than you ever have before? 3, has your level of busyness or chaos seeking increased? Or perhaps that busyness is your addiction because you know you're running from ever slowing down and having to sit in the shit that constantly rises up from within when you do. 4, do you repeatedly use different means to escape from your existence, such as pot, overworking, overparenting, pills, booze, incessant shopping, ceaseless swiping, scrolling, gaming, extreme experiences such as extreme sports, high-risk investments, gambling, war, killing, overparenting? 5, do you hate yourself to varying degrees at different times? 6, is self-criticism your default mode when anything happens? 7, do you tend to absolve others of responsibility but constantly self-flagellate? 8, are you forever taking from others time, attention, money, power? 9, are you forever giving to others, listening more than talking, fawning over them at the expense of yourself, doing everything for them, hoping they'll be nice or give you a little love in return? 10, are you overly aggressive? 11, are you overly passive and self-minimizing? There are a million possible indicators, but very often the simplest answer is simply that you either know you're miserable inside or you know you're running from shit. Because you know that if you were to stop and allow yourself to feel it, you'd be overcome with misery in about 2 seconds flat. That's how you know if you're depressed. Or reverse engineer the question. Start with the solution. Are you living your path, purpose, principles, or the way you know you would? Or the way you know you would make you... Start with the solution. Are you living your path, purpose, principles, or the way you know you would? Third try. Start with the solution. Are you living your path, purpose, and principles, or the way you know would make you most come alive? If not, I guarantee you're depressed. Depressed as hell inside. Guaranteed, whether you see it or not. So how do I cope with depression? Cope with it? Honestly, don't. Don't cope with depression. That's been the problem the whole time. I mean, sure, there are those brief spells where we just have to power through stuff. And a good coping mechanism, hey, can be a great thing. It can be helpful. But if you're still coping overall, you ain't healing. Coping is accepting something and just trying to live with it as best you can. That's what coping is. Healing is going to the root to solve the equation, specifically so that you don't have to live with it and cope with it anymore. Okay, then, how do I deal with it? How do I heal from it? You follow where the depression is leading you. You go down deep into it with the right tools to work your way out of it. Sure, you can get a therapist, but finding one who actually knows how to go deep to do the deep soul work is a bit of a sketchy enterprise because, well, how the hell are you really going to know? So I've made tools to do it yourself because I had to do it myself and create my own tools. And I've been using and refining these tools and coming up with new tools for decades with countless clients. Your starting tools right out of the gate are my 800 plus free videos on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and YouTube. Use them as journaling prompts. Start writing. Yes, physically writing or typing, not just voice to texting or not just letting it tumble around in your head. Start writing your thoughts, your memories, and especially the feelings that go with it. Ask the why question about 1,000,000 times, as well as the what was really going on underneath that inside of me. And such questions as that cause you to dive even deeper inside. Everything is about the questions that take us deeper and unearthing the answers. Download the free Badass Counseling Show podcast. I've got about 150 past episodes that you can get on Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. And in them, I'm either counseling people with problems very similar to yours, including depression, a common theme, including suicide, including anxiety, people with problems similar to yours. And then on other episodes, I'm directly answering listener questions. Again, all of this should be serving as journaling prompts. Additionally, you should be writing letters that you do not send to people whom you have strong feelings for or strong feelings against, and you don't send it because once you think you might send it or give it to them, you'll start to edit it. You'll start to cut back. You'll curb your language, and that goes against the healing of the soul. The healing requires flushing it all out, unfettered, unedited, unredacted. You must put words to your feelings. The healing comes from naming the beast, not just thinking about it, not just feeling the feelings. It's like when you find yourself suffering from, let's say your gums are swelling up, a rash on your ass, and your ankles are hurting, all at the same time, over the course of a few weeks. You're wondering, what the heck's going on? And then it protracts into a month or maybe 2 months. And your anxiety begins to go up more and more and more because these things aren't going away. Eventually, it's not gone, and your level of concern has gone through the roof. It's increased considerably. So finally, you make an appointment and you see the doctor. She examines you and she says, oh, it's just such and such malady. Here's the prescription. That'll be $400. See the reception on your way out. That such and such that she names it, that name of your symptoms changes everything. By naming the beast, she defangs it. It no longer is a cluster of anxiety-inducing symptoms and feelings. Now it's a thing that has a name, which means it's been studied, it's been understood and tamed to some greater or lesser degree at one point or another. Naming it is taming it. And it's no different in our inner life. In fact, it's infinitely more true when it comes to soul work. Drilling down to origins, true feelings, and implications of those origins and truths is extraordinarily powerful and life-changing. 2 books to step you through the depression healing. Most importantly, I've created 2 books to hold your hand and step you through the depression healing process. First is my bestseller, There's a Hole in My Love Cup. And soon it will be available in Spanish, in paperback and audiobook. For now, it is in audiobook, ebook, and paperback, all at badasscounseling.com. Second is Badass Wisdom, a killer 366-day daily meditational to take you to the ugly places and kick your ass. So my point is that even if you're getting professional help for your depression, you can accelerate your healing and growth by doing the out-of-session work on your own. And because of the somewhat limited nature of counseling, 50-minute sound bites at a time, doing deep work on your own can often vault you past what you're accomplishing in session. By the way, with this article that I'm reading to you, if you want the videos that are attached to it, go to Badass Counseling and click on the article and view the videos that go with this article on depression and suicide. How long does it take to see improvements? If you're doing the work, honestly, I'm an absolute believer that change can be immediate if you go deep enough. Absolutely, unequivocally. Now, does that mean the entire depression can be gone in one day or 1 week? No, not at all. But you can see movement, change, and new light and relief in a day, in a week. Absolutely. You can be healed from depression in months. Absolutely. I've seen it. I've done it. I know it to be fact. But it requires going deep enough. The problem is that most people in a whole lot of therapy just never go anywhere near deep enough into the shit from the past that is the origin of all that crud inside you that is not your authentic self. It's so easy to get absorbed into the immediacy of relationship struggles and financial problems and career stuff and family stuff that we never even touch. The past stuff in therapy, or in our own self-work. So that's like forever taking cough syrup, thinking the real problem of the sore throat is being solved, even though the virus or the infection is never being touched. Symptoms and causes are two completely different things. You get down to those real origins and stuff can change today. Absolutely. Literally today. But that requires the courage and the tools to go down there, to know what to look for, to know what to do when you're down there, to know what questions to ask, to not run when it gets scary. And parenthetically, if it ain't scary, you ain't gone deep enough yet. You're skimming. You're pretending to go deep, then wondering why the change isn't coming. You're terrified to go to the real shit. For the truths are too painful, and the potential implications and ramifications are harrowing. Ramifications are harrowing. So if you're not experiencing greater lightness, greater calm, and greater clarity in your life, either you or your therapist isn't going deep enough. And you need to find yourself new tools and or a new counselor, because you're just skimming and symptom solving. You're not anywhere near healing. What can you do to keep depression at bay after you've suffered from it? Well, in truth, if you're having to keep it at bay, then you never really solved it to begin with. You never got down to the real issues. You never began the work of living authentically and rejecting or ejecting the voices inside you that were never yours to begin with. The ones you've been living by at the expense of your original self, your original feelings and wants and needs and drives. The key to a depression-free and anxiety-free life is to live authentically, damn the price. You'll not be immune to life's vicissitudes and pains and losses and letdowns. No one is. But you will no longer be solving the present and the past at the same time. You'll no longer be bogged down by past crap and the expectations and pressures and criticisms of people who used to have power over you. Once you've healed that stuff from the past, you've removed so much crud from inside your love cup that you're now able to easily handle any new losses or challenges, not just because you've healed yourself before and now you know how, but because you have so much more room to handle it, so much more bandwidth, so much more energy, so much more capacity. You're not jammed up inside with all the past shit. If you're having to keep depression at bay, you never went deep enough to begin with, and you're not living your authentic self, because once you have, depression is no longer part of the conversation. Fact. It's just gone. Particularly if you're staying in your regular spiritual disciplines, as I call them: journaling, time alone, regular exercise, good rest, sleep, healthy diet, solitude with the soul pursuits, and more journaling and time alone. So all of this leads us back to where we started. Suicide. What's the link or relationship between depression and suicide? Suicide is when the self or the soul has been fully overwhelmed by the voices, wants, needs, expectations, pressures, powers, and pains of others rammed down your throat, taking over your entire life. It's when self has been extinguished. The divine flame, so to speak, inside of you has been drowned by the flood of otherness. Suicide isn't as simple as the depression getting bad enough. At the deepest levels, it's the complete belief that the soul of self doesn't matter and will never matter, and that the soul is bad, and that the self is completely unwanted by others. So it's not enough to say that suicide is untreated depression. Suicide is the absence of permission and courage to be oneself. People kill themselves because they've been conditioned to believe they suck. The real them isn't wanted or allowed, and they exist for others solely, and no amount of drugs of any sort can make those untrue truths go away. Again, if you're experiencing depression or thinking about suicide, whether you admit it to others or not, it's time to go deep. There are no two ways about it. That is the solution, and it demands courage. I'm all for resources such as suicide hotlines, suicide therapy, and even medications as necessary. Hell, my own mother was a suicide hotline counselor. I've counseled countless suicidal clients over the last 30 years. But in the end, you got to go deep into the soul and the origins of belief in your not mattering. If you are considering suicide, I have articles, I have resources on my website in this depression article. One is the Suicide Risk Assessment Questionnaire. 2 is the Columbia Protocol, simple questions that can prevent suicide. But what if I think someone else might be suicidal? I'll be real honest with you. If another person even so much as remotely mentions the word suicide publicly or to another person, it's a huge red flag, giant red flag. Bringing up suicide is a red flag. Get help now. It doesn't matter if you think they're serious or not. To even bring that word into the open is huge. Why? Because it's such a taboo topic in Western society, and most people fear some giant fuss being made, even if that very help is precisely what they're needing or craving inside. But also because someone who is suicidal likely fears their deepest pain and talks of suicide being mishandled, minimized, or hurt even further. I mean, let's be honest. Think about this. If the root of suicide/depression is soul pain caused by the voices and expectations of others being rammed down your throat at the expense of your own soul, then it's reasonable to assume that if you bring those pains up to the people closest to you, you're bringing it up likely to the people who caused the pain and problems in the first place, which means there's an extraordinarily high likelihood they'll screw it up. They'll muff the ball on this one too, potentially blowing it even worse, potentially causing even further damage. Did you catch that? See, suicide is not optional insofar as getting a potentially suicidal person to someone who can help them is not up for debate. It's mandatory. The mere mention of it as a desire to have you hear their pain and take some action to actually help them. The mere mention of it is a desire to have you hear their pain and take some action to actually help them. This is not the time to trust them to their own devices. It's time to get them help, as in now. Call 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So what if I'm part of the problem? What do you do if you think you might be one of the voices and pain sources inside the person you think might be suicidal? Interestingly, you need to start going into your own shit to determine and disgorge all of your own pain from your past and the messages you were taught about yourself. Because it is your own trauma and shit that caused you to control, manipulate, hurt, or use this person who's now suicidal. Your shit is causing their shit. To truly help them solve themselves, you need to solve yourself, which includes going to them and beginning to truly own all you did to bring such egregious pain and suffering to their lives. And it is precisely here that you are being forced by life to choose between you and them. Your ego, your conviction that you are or were a great parent, your own demands, etc. You have to ask yourself a couple of questions. Would you admit grievous fault and failure if it meant keeping alive someone you claim to love? Would you? Or is your ego so frail that you have to protect yourself at the expense of them? If you chose the frail ego option, wow. You've basically implicated yourself as the likely person who drove them to suicide in the first place. Healing from depression and avoiding suicide. If this holiday season finds you depressed, don't just cope. Give yourself permission to seize your life back. Avoid sinking further into thoughts of suicide. As a person who was suicidally depressed for 12 years, you have to go deep. You have to start doing the healing. Get professional help if that feels right to you. Get professional help to start with, even if it doesn't quite feel right, but you need help. And as I said, I've created tools here for you. I have been where you are. Circumstances were different, but I have been there. And I am telling you, as a matter of absolute fact, healing is not only possible, it's very, very doable. But you have to have the courage and the willingness to open up and go into the deep shit that you've been running from your whole life. The stuff that has been dominating, sitting life's fat ass right on your head and you can't breathe. That's the very stuff that you fear most. It is at the very root of your healing. I'm telling you it as fact. Have a kick-ass day.